This time around, I'll be working on several small projects for big improvements. Starting with this storage area next to the quarter berth. So the J.J. Taylor built Contessas have these sliders on either side, and they've always looked a bit unfinished to me. I mean, it just looks like 1/4-inch plywood. So I think I can dress this up a little bit, at least on the edges, and finger pulls. I had a few of these in my parts box and also purchased them for this project. So I'll need 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6 here in the little storage area that I built above the head. Okay, so getting started, the size of the hole here in the slider is much smaller than the one for the finger pull, or at least for it to fit in there. And if I were to just take a hole saw and try to open that up, it would just mangle the hole. So I'm going to use an old trick, which is to hot glue a piece of wood onto the back of this with a hole in it already centered. And I'll use that hole to guide the drill bit on the hole saw and open that up to the proper size. Okay, got that glued in there. See, dripping out. And so that worked out nicely. As soon as the hole saw got through the plywood here, it would break away the glue that was holding the wood to the back of it. So we are set. Next step, I'd like to maybe put a little bit of trim on this raw edge here of the slider. I was going to do these two, but I don't think that's necessary. So I have some scrap teak, and I'm going to just epoxy that on there. However, before I epoxy anything, it's probably a good idea to get a few coats of varnish on there. The varnish should dry quick. It's about 98 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and geez, just under 120 degrees up here at the top of the boat shed in the cockpit. That's about 50 degrees Celsius. And now those are epoxied in. Little trim piece and all the finger pulls. I just used some quick 5-minute epoxy. That's the starboard side. Here's the port side. Looks great. And above the head, the trim and finger pulls, and we're done. Okay, moving on to the next project. So the stern light here, which is hanging because I had recently varnished the tow rail, is actually blocked by the monitor frame here. So I want to put a different stern light here right on the monitor itself, nice and high. Scanmar does sell one specifically for this that you can retrofit onto here. A little pricey for me, but I do have this inexpensive one here from Hella Marine. It was like 15 bucks, something like that. But does have an incandescent bulb, so I have some LED bulbs. And the only thing here is that the back of this light is actually flat, and I need to mount it to a tube. And I'm sure that there are brackets sold somewhere, but what would be the fun in just buying something when I can make something? And getting started with that bracket, so I have an aluminum collar. This came from my parts box. I believe it was for a shaft seal or something. Use that as a template to draw a curve onto a scrap piece of G10 from a box of scraps that I have, and then use a hole saw to cut that out, and then just epoxied it onto the collar or half collar Drilled some holes to match up the holes in the back of this in order to attach it to the flat part. And next step was to put a little black paint on it. And also the holes in the back, I epoxied in some riv nuts. Normally these are used with a special rivet gun, and it leaves a threaded hole. But in this case, I just epoxied it right in to screw in through the light itself, the body. And since those are aluminum and the screws are stainless, we put a little Tef gel in there. Okay, so I made up some wire here for the light, and I ended up crimping on some terminals with that ratcheting tool. Originally I tried to solder them on, but had a lot of trouble. I covered everything in dielectric grease, so hopefully that lasts a while. And the clamp itself, I ended up putting a slot here so that I can get the wire through. And through that little grommet there. And just before final assembly, I used some 4200 in between the clamp and the body of the light for extra strength and sealing, and also where the wire passes through to prevent any water ingress. And now fully assembled and ready for installation. And now easily installed. So it's on. I don't know if you can really see it during the day, but it's glowing. And I just ran the wire down here along the monitor frame and in through the existing hole from the original light, through one of these deck pass-throughs that I had from, I saved them, they were actually on by the mast, and sealed that with some butyl tape. And then just use these soldering tubes to connect the existing wiring. And that's the old one. And at some point I may drill some holes in the frame and run the wire through and have it come out. But for now, I'm going to leave it like that and call it done. And this was a good project, big improvement for very little work. The next project isn't really a modification or an improvement, but rather something I'm documenting for posterity. So the zinc that I added a couple years ago, there were a couple chunks taken out at the marina when they needed to lift the back of the boat to get the straps out from the travel lift. But even so, I've noticed an accelerated degradation of the zinc itself. I mean, there's all kinds of pitting and it seems to be eating away at a faster rate, and I believe that's because of the lightning ground plate there, which is actually tied to the engine and the prop itself. So I'm going to replace that with a new one. And if there was any question to how worn out and porous that thing became, it actually crumbled as soon as I started to loosen one of the bolts. And now that's bolted on. So I did forget that there was a little slot in the old one here. And this is to clear the key and the keyway for the prop. But I was able to cut that in and no problem. And next project, I'd like to address this gaping hole here that allows water in at the manual bilge pump. Originally it was mounted here. You can actually see where it was covered, but for some reason the previous owner relocated it here. And I'm going to just use a deck plate kit for this. Originally I used, or was planning to use, one with a cover, but it interfered with the latch here. So I'm going with this other one, which also kind of overlaps, but I can cut away the trim ring. Okay, so I removed the pump temporarily just to get a better idea of the fitment here. So I noticed that these holes match up with the pump, which I guess is what it's supposed to do. And putting that in like that, I can now match this up and maybe draw a line where to cut. This is kind of what I had in mind. Just drew a line on there, and I'll kind of trim that away little by little until I get the right fit. And I think that'll do it. That's acceptable. That'll do it. So here's where I store my handle. Okay, I like it. So clearly it stands out because the gel coat's very dirty. But at some point I'll clean that up and that should blend in nicely.